"No one wants a plain woman with children," Luella Voss said, loud enough for every boarder in the room to hear, and quiet enough to pretend she had not meant it cruel. The remark landed between the soup tureen and the lamp like something greasy set down on good linen. Forks slowed. Somebody coughed into a napkin. Hester Doyle kept her hands on the platter she was carrying, though the weight of it seemed to change all at once, as if the roast had turned to iron. Her daughter May stood at the sideboard with a stack of cracked plates, chin up too high for a 9-year-old, while little Ollie stared at the floorboards as if he might open a knot in the wood with his eyes and disappear down into it. Luella, in her plum dress with the tight cuffs and the silver pin at her throat, smiled the way some women did when they wanted their meanness mistaken for wisdom. "I only say it because somebody ought to," she went on, turning toward the man just arrived from the road. "A bachelor with a place to run wants ease, not another man's children hanging off his chair." The man had not yet taken off his gloves. He stood in the doorway with dust on his shoulders and the look of a person who had ridden hard and still had farther to go. He was taller than most, not broad in the belly like the cattle buyers who came through on Saturdays, but long and raw-boned, with a sun-browned face and eyes so gray they seemed pale in the lamplight. Hester knew him by sight, if not by conversation. Ward Halcombe, of Cedar Gap, freight hauler, horse breeder, keeper of a rough piece of land 12 miles west of town, where the road bent toward the cottonwoods and the hills rose blue beyond. She also knew his name for another reason, and the knowing of it had never sat easy in her chest. He looked at Luella once, no more than that. Then his gaze shifted to Hester, to the platter in her hands, to May holding herself stiff as a soldier, to Ollie in his mended shirt, and finally to the row of biscuits cooling on the kitchen pass. "When's supper?" he asked. The room went so still the lamp hissed loud. Luella gave a little laugh that sounded pinched. "Why, it's already on." Ward nodded toward Hester, not Luella. "Then I reckon I'm speaking to the right person." Hester did not answer right away. She could feel every eye in the boarding house fixed on her face, waiting to see whether she would blush, stammer, cry, or make herself grateful. She did none of those things. She carried the platter to the table, set it down straight, and said, "Soon as the coffee's poured." Ward took the chair at the end of the table, as if that had always been his place. He said grace in a voice low enough that the words stayed between his hands and the plate. Then he ate what Hester set before him without haste and without praise, which oddly suited her better than any flattery would have. Men who praised a widow's cooking too quick were usually asking for something before the pie was cut. Luella kept up a stream of bright little remarks all through the meal, most of them aimed at Ward, and all of them glancing off him like peas off a shovel. He asked May if she liked books. He asked Ollie whether the marbles in his pocket were agates or clay. He asked Hester if the roast had been started low or hot. It was the only question anybody in that room had asked her all week that suggested she knew something worth knowing. By the time the plates were cleared, Hester was angry all over again, though not with him. Anger was better than shame. It warmed her hands and steadied her back. When the last boarder had gone upstairs and Luella had retired to the parlor to tell her husband Perry how strange men could be, Ward remained at the table with a second cup of coffee untouched before him. Hester was scraping plates into the slop bucket. May and Ollie were drying the good dishes with flour sack towels. Ward waited until the children had gone into the kitchen and then said, "I came to town to ask if you'd consider an offer." Hester did not turn around. "If it's to come cook for your hay crew, you could have said so before supper and saved Luella her sport." "It isn't just that." Now she looked at him. The lamplight found the tiredness in his face, and something else behind it, something careful, almost reluctant. "My sister died in April," he said. "Left me her girl. My young half-brother's still with me too. There's a house at Cedar Gap, but it's been more roof than home these past months. I've got a county matron due out in 2 weeks who thinks a deaf girl belongs in an institution and a boy of 15 belongs wherever he can be beat into obedience. I disagree. A single man disagreeing ain't worth much on paper." Hester set the knife down. "You're asking me to keep house. I am asking you to marry me." She stared at him long enough to hear the kettle shift on the stove in the next room. He went on, in that same plain voice, "I won't dress it fancy. You need steadier ground than Luella Voss's kitchen, and I need a household no busybody can unmake by signing her name to a complaint. Your children come with you if you come. If you say no, I'll not trouble you again. If you say yes, Cedar Gap is as much yours to run as mine the day you step off the wagon." The old board seemed to move under Hester's feet. Marriage Not courtship, not pity, not a man reaching after her in the dark because he was lonely and she was available. Marriage said out loud over cooling coffee and scraped plates. And you came to this notion over one meal? She asked. Ward's hand rested beside the cup, scarred across the knuckles. No, I came to town meaning to ask. Supper only told me I wasn't wrong. Hester almost laughed at that, though there was no mirth in her. You know what people say. I know exactly what people say. You know my husband died on one of your freight runs. The words were sharp between them. They had lived in her mouth a long time and never yet done her any good. Ward did not flinch. I do. She had wanted him to defend himself perhaps, or bow his head, or show annoyance. Instead, he only sat there, receiving the blow she had offered. It was the Blackstone grade, she said, because now that the thing had been named, she could not stop. The brake gave on the descent. The wagon turned. He was crushed under the load before anybody could pull him clear. I know where it happened, she swallowed. Then you know why I can't answer you tonight. Yes, he said. I know that too. He stood, put money under the saucer for the meal, though Luella would likely pocket it herself, and moved toward the door. There he paused with one hand on the jamb. You need not do me any kindness, Mrs. Doyle, he said, but do yourself one. Think on whether this town has offered you anything except a place to stand while folks tell you what you ain't. He glanced toward the kitchen where May was whispering to Ollie. Think on whether your children are better served by other people's mercy or their mother's choosing. Then he put on his gloves and went out into the cooling night. If you have ever had a room turn on one sentence, you know how long the air keeps the shape of it after the speaker is gone. Hester slept little. She lay in the narrow bed under the sloped ceiling, with Ollie warm beside her and May in the trundle below, and listened to the boarding house settle. Pipe knock, rafter creak, a drunk laughing in the alley and then not laughing anymore. She thought of Daniel, dead a year and a half now. She thought of the way grief had first come like a wagon rolling downhill, and then, when it did not kill her outright, had settled into the daily work of being diminished, not by mourning itself. Mourning was honest, but by dependence, by waiting in kitchens, by hearing women lower their voices when one's children entered, as though poverty might be catching. Daniel had not left her much. He had been handsome, quick with his hands, quicker with promises, and forever certain there would be more money next season. There never had been. After his death she had sold the mule, the decent clock, the walnut cradle, and finally the wedding china with the blue edge. Luella had taken her on at the boarding house because cheap labor was cheaper than charity, and Perry Voss had allowed Hester and the children the back room because it let him feel magnanimous at little expense. By breakfast the next morning, Luella was all sweetness. She offered Hester the heel of the ham and said she hoped no offense had been taken. Hester replied that offense rarely improved once slept on. Luella went pink around the nostrils and sent her to scrub the pantry shelves. That afternoon, Perry Voss came in with the ledger under his arm and the cheerful expression of a man about to call something necessity when it was only convenience. Need the room by month's end, he said, not looking at her while he said it. My cousin Fern's coming from Rawlins with her 2 girls. Family's family. Hester kept shelling peas into the basin. And what am I? Perry shifted. Temporary. It was a small word, but she felt it strike all the same. When he left, May sat down on the overturned flour barrel and asked, Are we being turned out? Hester wanted to tell her no. She had spent 18 months telling the children no while life went ahead and made a liar of her. So she dried her hands and told the truth. By month's end, May's face stiffened in that way that made her look older than her years. Then, maybe we should go to the church, ladies. Mrs. Bell says they can find places for children. Not for mine, Hester said sharply, then gentled at once. She drew the girl close. Listen to me. Nobody is placing you anywhere, not while I've breath. That evening, when the supper dishes were done and Luella had gone calling, Hester took the children down to the river path beyond the livery where the mosquitoes rose in the weeds and the cottonwoods clicked softly in the dusk. She sat on a stump and told them about Ward Halcombe's offer. Ollie asked whether Cedar Gap had snakes. Likely, Hester said. May asked whether they would have to call him father. No. May looked at the river a long while. Did he seem mean? No. Did he seem kind? Hester considered. He seemed exact. That made May think even longer. Finally the girl said, Sometimes exact is better. The words sat in Hester's lap like a tool she had not known she needed. 2 days later, Bay gelding before driving home. The sun was straight overhead, and heat shimmered above the road in a way that made the town look frail and half-imagined. Ward stood with his shirt sleeves rolled, holding the horse steady while the smith worked. He saw Hester, gave no sign beyond handing the reins to the boy at the forge, and came to meet her beside the water trough. "I've 3 conditions," she said before he could speak. "Name them." "My children stay with me in all things. Yes, if it turns bad, I leave by first frost with wages enough to start elsewhere. Yes, and you don't ask me for what I can't give yet." Something changed in his face then, not disappointment exactly, but a grave kind of understanding. "I won't take what ain't offered," he said. So that was settled. The wedding took place the following Thursday in the back room of the Mercantile with Reverend Bell, who looked as though he wished marriages came with a longer instruction sheet. Luella attended because she could not bear not to. Perry signed as witness with a pen that scratched like a beetle. May wore the blue ribbon Hester had been saving for Easter. Ollie stood on Ward's boot, keep still. Ward's half-brother, Levi, came in from Cedar Gap with the team and blushed to the ears when spoken to. The deaf girl, Tansy, did not come. Hester heard later she had refused. Afterward there was no dinner, no music, no rice, no foolish cheering in the street. There was only a wagon loaded with 2 trunks, a sewing basket, the children, and the small box of things Hester had not sold because to sell them would have been to admit she meant never to be herself again. As they left town, Luella called after her from the boarding house steps, "You'll be back by snow." Hester Doyle, if not by choice, by weather. Hester did not turn around. Cedar Gap lay where the road narrowed and the grass opened westward in a wide sweep broken by cottonwoods, a creek, and a rise of low dark hills. The house was bigger than Hester expected, and lonelier too. 2 stories, weathered gray, with a lean-to kitchen and a broad porch that had seen better paint. A red barn stood off to one side. Beyond it, corrals, a wagon shed, a smokehouse, and fields silver green with new hay. There was wind always, traveling along the grass like a hand smoothing a quilt. The first person Hester met there was Tansy Halcombe, standing on the porch with her braids tied in rawhide and her chin tilted in challenge. She was 11, narrow as a reed, and had the guarded eyes of a child who had been discussed in front of too many doors. She did not come forward when the wagon stopped. She did not smile at the other children. She watched Hester as if assessing whether this new arrangement might yet be survived. Ward signed something with his hands toward her, clumsy, stiff, but practiced enough to be understood. Tansy answered with a flash of fingers too fast for Hester to follow, then turned and went inside. She says, "Your bonnet looks mournful," Levi translated, mortified. Ollie whispered, "Delighted. I like her." There was work from the first minute. The kitchen had been run by a competent woman once, and then by grief. Jars unlabeled, flour left open, soap cut thick as brick, shirts half-mended, lamp chimneys smoked brown. Hester set to with the clean ferocity of someone who understood that order was not neatness but defense. By the 3rd day, the pantry shelves were lined with paper. By the 5th, the children's bed was made up in the south room, and a curtain hung across the alcove for Tansy's privacy. By the 7th, the coffee was ground fine, the stove wood stacked dry, and even the porch boards seemed to know they belonged to people again. Ward did not hover. He went about the stock, the freight harness, the fence along the north pasture. He came in at meals, washed before sitting, ate what was set before him, and thanked her every time as if gratitude were not a thing he could safely assume. Levi worked hard and laughed seldom. Tansy moved like a cat through the house, seeing all, yielding nothing. She would not let Hester braid her hair or mend her dress while she wore it. She tolerated May first, then Ollie, who discovered by accident that if he built his little armies of pebbles into ranks upon the porch rail, Tansy would silently come and improve the formation. On the 10th night, a thunderstorm gathered over the hills. The children were abed. Levi had gone to the barn for the last lantern check. Ward sat at the table repairing a halter, and Hester was darning a sock by the light of 2 lamps, because Tansy read best with more brightness than the others liked. Rain began hard and sudden on the roof. Tansy flinched. Only then did Hester understand. The girl could not hear the storm in the ordinary sense, but she felt the house answer it, the shudder in the glass, the vibration in the table, the quick changes in everybody else's faces. Fear lived in those second-hand ways too. Hester rose, crossed to the shelf, and took down the breadboard. She set it on Tansy's lap, and brought over a bowl of dough she had mixed for morning biscuits. Tansy looked up, puzzled. "Punch it," Hester said, then remembered. She flattened her hands, made the motion, smiled a little. The girl hesitated, then drove both fists into the dough. Something like laughter moved across the table, though no one made much sound of it. May came down the stairs in her nightgown and took the rolling pin. Ollie appeared behind her, carrying flour all over his front. Ward leaned back and watched while the storm rolled over the house and the children shaped lopsided biscuits by lamplight. And for a little while, the fear in the room had somewhere else to go. Later, when the trays were set and the kitchen smelled warm and yeasty, Hester found Ward on the porch with the rain tapering off and the air sweet from wet earth. He stood with one hand on the rail, looking out toward the black fields. "She doesn't like storms," he said. "She likes bread making during them." A corner of his mouth moved. "That'll help." Hester folded her shawl tighter. "You might have told me sooner." He was quiet a moment. "You might have left if I had told you everything at once." That pricked. "I'm not so easily run off." "No," he said. "You're not." The wind shifted. Somewhere in the barn a horse stamped. Hester found herself saying, "I thought you would ask more of me by now." Ward kept his eyes on the dark. "And I thought you'd breathe easier if I didn't." She looked at his profile, the worn line of his jaw, the patience in him that did not preen over itself. "You were right," he nodded once, as if that settled a matter of freight weight or fence posts, and went in to bank the stove. By midsummer the talk in town had changed shape, if not kindness. Folks who came out to Cedar Gap for haying found the meals hot, the bread plentiful, the children clean, and the house run close enough that even a careless man noticed. Some approved. Some resented being made to. Luella Voss visited once in a hat too fine for the road, and spent half an hour peering about, as if hoping to find squalor in the corners. She left displeased that the curtains were white and the preserves done proper. "What did she want?" Levi asked after watching her buggy vanish in a line of dust. "To measure," Hester said. "And?" She came up short. Still, judgment had a long memory. At Sunday meeting there were women who smiled only with their lips. There were men who spoke to Ward over Hester's head as if arrangements between husband and wife could be sorted like feed prices. And there was Mrs. Gleason, the county matron, who came out one bright August morning with a notebook and a face like unseasoned dough. She inspected the bedrooms, the pump, the stove, the children's hands, the milk crock, and Tansy's copybook. Tansy submitted with the bleak composure a calf at market. Hester stood near enough for the girl to see if needed. Ward answered the practical questions. Mrs. Gleason made notes with tiny disapproving scratches. At last she said, "The child would do better among specialists." Tansy's eyes dropped. Hester said, "The child is standing right here." Mrs. Gleason blinked. "I only mean her condition requires training." "What she requires," Hester said, "is not being spoken over as if she were furniture." Ward's gaze shifted toward her, quick and unreadable. Mrs. Gleason snapped the notebook shut. "You are new to the arrangement, Mrs. Halcombe. Sentiment is not system." "No," Hester said, "but neglect often comes dressed as expertise." The matron left dry as paper, and no better company. Tansy disappeared to the creek bank for 2 hours after. Hester found her there at dusk, sitting with her shoes off and her feet in the cold water. Hester sat beside her without speaking. After a time Tansy signed, slow enough for a beginner to catch only fragments. Hester knew a few things now. House, stay, no school, not enough. "Tansy," she said softly, touching her own chest first and then the girl's so she would watch her mouth, "I am learning." The child studied her a long moment. Then she took Hester's hand and shaped Hester's fingers into the sign for home. The lesson stayed in Hester's palm all night. A week later, while cleaning the upstairs room that had belonged to Ward's sister, Hester found the tin box. It was pushed far back, under the eaves, behind a stack of old seed catalogs, and wrapped in a flour sack, gone brittle at the folds. She almost set it aside, unopened, thinking it full of buttons or mourning ribbons, but the weight of it was wrong. Inside were freight tallies, receipts, 2 letters tied with string, and a brass brake pin scarred by fresh-cut file marks that had no business being on it unless some hand had put them there. Hester sat down hard on the trunk by the wall. One of the letters was in a hand she knew at once, Daniel's. Her husband's writing had always leaned forward like a man striding into weather. The paper crackled under her fingers as she opened it. Het, Perry Voss is running double books on Halcombe's freight, and Sibley knows it. They've had me carrying loads marked short before they even leave town. I told Perry I'd not stand for it again after this week's run. He laughed, said, "A poor man ought to love wages more than principle. If anything goes queer on Blackstone, it won't be accident. Don't take their word over mine. Take the children and go where there's less smiling. I meant to tell you sooner." The room went white around the edges. She read it again, then again. The words did not alter. They only deepened, like wagon tracks after rain. All those months she had pictured Daniel's death as bad luck married to steep road, had cursed his recklessness. Ward's line, the mountain, God himself on hungry nights. And here, in her hand, was proof that luck had not been the whole of it. There had been hands in it, names in it, smiles. Below the letter lay freight sheets in Perry's ledger hand, amounts crossed and rewritten, dates changed, signatures copied. Hester could not make full sense of all of it, but she understood enough. Cedar Gap had been bled by fraud. Daniel had found out. The brake pin with the file marks shone dull as bone in the box. When Ward came in from the lower pasture, he found her at the kitchen table with the papers spread before her and the look of a person who had received a blow too old to block. He did not touch anything. "Where did you get those?" "Upstairs. In your sister's room." His face altered as he read the first line of Daniel's letter. Not surprise, exactly. Recognition, and grief gone tired with waiting. "You knew," Hester said. "I suspected." "You suspected?" Her voice rose before she could stop it. "My husband died, and you suspected?" Ward lifted his eyes. "I suspected Perry was cheating the loads. I suspected Blackstone wasn't clean. I did not have proof enough to take to a judge and not be laughed out of the room by men who dine with Amos Sibley. Your husband was dead. My sister was dying by then. Levi was half wild. Tansy was 6. I kept the place standing and looked for what I could not find. And said nothing to me. What good would suspicion have done you then, besides give your grief another nail to hang on?" She pushed back from the table. The chair scraped harsh. "The truth would have done me good." His answer came low and steady. "You think I don't know that?" They stood with the papers between them, and the children's voices faint from outside where they were gathering eggs. Hester saw then that Ward had carried his own share of Blackstone all this time, not because it had been his fault, but because guilt, once it found a house, seldom cared whether it belonged there. He reached into his coat and set something on the table, a stack of money order receipts folded small from much handling. "I sent what I could the winters after," he said, "through Reverend Bell. Anonymous, so you'd take it." Hester stared. There had indeed been envelopes, some winter's coal money, once a sack order for flour and lard, once 2 blankets when Ollie had taken croup. She had never known who sent them. "Why?" she asked, though her throat had tightened around the word. "Because a man died on my line and left children," Ward said. "And because I could." She sat again, suddenly weak. The anger remained, but its shape had changed. It was no longer aimed cleanly in one direction. Tansy appeared in the doorway just then, took in the papers, and froze. Her face went strange and pale. She signed something sharp toward Ward. He answered. The exchange flashed too fast for Hester. Levi came in behind her, carrying the egg basket. He looked from one adult to the other, and then at the tin box. The color drained out of him too. "What is it?" Hester said. Levi set the basket down so carefully it was almost fear. "Tansy found that box years ago," he said, "after Aunt Miriam died. She took it because Perry Voss came by that day you buried her, asking after old papers. Tansy saw him and hid the box. She told me not to say." Ward stared at the girl. "Why in God's name didn't you show me?" Levi's mouth worked. "Because I was 12 and she was 6, and Perry said, if we started trouble, he'd see the place, took from you, and us split up besides. He said, folks in town already thought you too rough for children." No one spoke. At last, Tansy signed again, slower this time, her hands shaking. Hester caught only one word, bridge, then another, saw. Levi swallowed. "She says she saw Perry by the wagon before Blackstone. Not hearing isn't the same as not seeing." The whole kitchen seemed to tip. Ward put both hands on the table as if to steady it. For the first time since Hester had known him, his voice came raw. "Then, it's done. We take this in tomorrow." But tomorrow did not wait gently. Before dawn, a rider came from town with a notice folded in oilcloth and tied to the gatepost. Amos Sibley was calling in the Cedar Gap note, effective immediately. Sum due within 10 days. Failing payment, sheriff's sale to follow. The paper was neat, official, and fast as a snake. Someone had learned, the box was found. That same afternoon, Mrs. Gleason returned with a second document stating that concerns had been raised about the fitness of the Halcombe household, particularly regarding the welfare of a disabled minor. She would review custody in town on the day of the sale. Luella and Perry had not bothered even to move quietly now. The next hours ran hard. Ward rode to fetch Reverend Bell and speak to the sheriff. Levi went over the ledgers with a schoolmaster from the neighboring ranch who could reckon better than any of them. Hester copied Daniel's letter by lamplight in case the original was lost. Tansy would not let the tin box out of reach. May hushed Ollie and carried water without being asked. Nobody said aloud what all of them knew. If Amos Sibley could force the sale quick enough, and Mrs. Gleason could declare the house unsuitable in the same breath, Cedar Gap might be gutted in a single morning. That night, just after moonrise, Levi smelled smoke. It started in the hayrick beyond the barn, a low red crawling line at the base where kindling should not have been. By the time he shouted, the wind had taken hold. Flames licked upward, then raced. Horses hammered the stall doors. Ollie woke screaming. May grabbed the quilt bundle Hester kept by the stairs. Ward was at the barn in 3 strides, cutting lead ropes. Levi hauled buckets from the pump. Sparks flew over the yard in bright wicked swarms. Tansy, Hester cried. No answer. Of course no answer. Panic took her by the throat. She found the girl not in the yard but back inside the house, in the upstairs room under the eaves, trying to drag the tin box from its hiding place with both hands while smoke curled through the rafters. Hester nearly struck her dead from fright. Leave it! Tansy shook her head hard, tears of rage already on her face. The floor beneath them thudded as someone below slammed a door against the draft. Heat licked down the hallway. Hester seized the box, shoved it under one arm, and caught Tansy's wrist with the other. They ran bent low through smoke and down the stairs half blind. At the bottom, Ward met them, soot-black and wild-eyed, and shoved them toward the yard while he went back once more for the account books from the desk. The hayrick burned hot enough to blister paint from the barn wall, but by some mercy the wind shifted toward the creek instead of the house. They saved the barn. They saved the team. They saved the papers. By the time the fire sank to a smoking red heap, the eastern sky had gone pale. Ward found boot tracks by the fence where no one in the household had been. One heel was worn crooked. Perry Voss had such a heel. So did half the county perhaps, but Hester did not think this one belonged to chance. They could have stayed home after that. Could have hidden, could have told themselves there would be another day to fight, but something in Hester had gone beyond the place where fear could make a bargain. At first light, she washed the soot from May's face, braided Tansy's hair with steady fingers, put Ollie into a clean shirt, and pinned Daniel's letter inside her bodice. When Ward said the creek road might be half washed from the storm 2 nights before, she said they would take the uppercut. When he said the sale crowd might turn ugly, she said all the better for witnesses. Then she climbed onto the wagon beside him. The town square was full by mid-morning. Sheriff's sales drew men the way blood drew yellow jackets. Farmers stood with arms folded. Storekeepers pretended not to look eager. Luella Voss stood under the mercantile awning in a cream hat and gloves, her face composed into injured innocence. Perry kept to the edge of the crowd, too careful by half. Amos Sibley emerged from the bank in a black coat despite the heat, carrying propriety around him like a second skin. Mrs. Gleason was already inside the church annex where the custody review would be held. A judge from Laramie, traveling circuit, had agreed to hear both matters for efficiency's sake. Efficiency was a fine word for cruelty when used by the right people. Hester stepped down from the wagon and felt every eye in town count her children, her plain dress, the soot shadow still missed along one cuff. Let them count, she thought. Let them measure the wrong things once more. Inside the annex, the air smelled of old hymnals and dust. The judge was a narrow man, with tired spectacles. Reverend Bell stood near the back. So did the sheriff. Levi held the tin box against his chest like a Bible. Tansy stood at Hester's side, watching mouths the way other people watched weather. Amos Sibley spoke first. He did it sorrowfully, as men often did when they meant to injure someone in a respectable fashion. There had been concerns. The Halcombe note was long overdue, the marriage recent, the household irregular, the deaf child underserved. Best to place assets and dependents where they could be properly managed. Mrs. Gleason added that emotional attachment, while natural, should not cloud sound civic judgment. Then Perry Voss stood and swore he had always wished Hester well, but feared she had been persuaded into a desperate arrangement by a man unable to maintain proper accounts. Something in the room tightened. Ward began to answer, but Hester laid a hand on his sleeve and stepped forward herself. She did not speak quickly. Quick speech could be mistaken for nerves. She spoke the way she kneaded bread, with pressure enough to change the thing in front of her. "My husband died on the Blackstone grade," she said. "For 18 months I believed it misfortune. It was not. It was theft, with a Bible face on it." A murmur moved through the benches. She drew Daniel's letter from her bodice and handed it to the judge. Then the freight sheets. Then the brake pin wrapped in cloth. Levi gave the tin box over last. Hester told how it had been found. Levi told what Perry had threatened when he was a boy. Tansy, trembling but furious, signed what she had seen by the wagon years before, and what she had seen again in the yard the night before the fire. Reverend Bell, who knew more of signs than anyone else present, interpreted carefully, word for word. Perry's face went slack. Luella's hand rose to her throat. Amos Sibley looked not outraged but annoyed, which was worse. The judge read Daniel's letter twice. Then he removed his spectacles and looked straight at Perry. "Did you alter these manifests?" Perry licked his lips. "Those sheets prove nothing without context. Did you or did you not?" Perry's eyes flicked toward Amos. "It was enough. The sheriff saw it too." What followed broke fast. Not in fists or gunfire, this was never that kind of story, but in the way a rotten beam gives and brings the whole porch down with it. The schoolmaster identified the false tallies. Reverend Bell swore to the anonymous money orders Ward had sent Hester after Daniel's death. Levi, white to the mouth, admitted he had seen Perry near the Blackstone wagon before the fatal run, and had held his tongue from fear. Mrs. Gleason, seeing the tide turn, tried to retreat behind procedure, but the judge had had enough of procedure used as a cudgel. Perry blustered. Luella cried. Amos Sibley asked for adjournment. The judge denied it. At some point Luella found her voice again and snapped. All this over a woman who took the first offer because she had nowhere else to go. Hester turned then. Not hot, not loud, but clear enough that the last whisper died to hear her. "Being wanted is a small thing beside being kept." The room went still around that sentence. It stood there by itself, needing no help. Even Luella looked as though she understood, if only for the length of one breath, that she had spent her life confusing desirability with worth, and had come poorer for it. By noon the sale was stayed. The judge ordered an inquiry into Sibley's books and the Voss accounts, and directed that no action be taken against Tansy's custody pending that investigation. Perry was taken into the sheriff's office through the side door, not because the law had yet finished with him, but because men who had admired his waistcoats all year suddenly did not wish to be seen beside him. Amos Sibley left by the bank alley with his collar wilted and no one tipping a hat. Ward stood on the church steps afterward, as though he had ridden through bad weather, and only just now discovered he was wet through. Hester came down beside him. The children clustered close. Tansy slipped her hand into Hester's without looking up. "It's not over," Ward said quietly. "No," Hester said, "but it has begun to end." He looked at her then in a way he had not allowed himself before openly, fully, with no bargain left between them to hide inside. "I should have told you sooner," he said. "Yes, I know." She let the yes stand. Then, because truth had done enough damage for one season and ought now to be allowed some healing work, she added, "But you stayed." Something softened in him at last, not into weakness, but into rest. By autumn the world had shifted. Not transformed all at once, that only happened in bad novels and campaign promises, but shifted enough that a family could feel the ground under it as solid again. Amos Sibley resigned from the bank before he could be turned out. Perry Voss went to Cheyenne to await trial on fraud and attempted arson, and fewer people than expected were sorry. Luella kept the boarding house because practicality outlives scandal, but the set of her shoulders changed. She did less pronouncing after that, and more listening, which was improvement enough for most mortals. At Cedar Gap, the hay came in thick. May began reading chapter books by the parlor lamp to Tansy, who followed with a finger under the lines, and then taught May signs for river, thunder, stubborn, and fox. Ollie adopted a three-legged barn cat and named him Marshall, for reasons known only to boys and Providence. Levi shot up another inch and started smiling without seeming to notice. Hester planted a late kitchen patch and hung red peppers to dry under the porch eaves. Ward built her deeper shelves in the pantry without being asked, and widened the back step because she once mentioned it caught her skirt. Such things were not speeches, they were better. The first time he kissed her was in November after the stock were fed, and the sky had gone lavender over the grass. There was nothing grand in it. He came in from the cold with sawdust on his sleeve, found her standing by the table with flour on her cheek, and paused as if approaching skittish stock. She smiled at that, just a little, and spared him the whole distance. The kiss was warm, brief, and so carefully offered it almost undid her. She rested her forehead against his coat after, listening to the heart under it, surprised by how peaceful surprise could be. Winter came lean and white. They managed it. Spring came after, muddy and honest, with calves bawling in the meadow and the creek running high enough to talk all night. By then, folks had taken to saying Cedar Gap as if it had always meant a settled place, a house, a table, a patch of earth where children did not lower their voices for fear of being borrowed away. And if this tale found you by a stove, or on a dark road with the miles sliding under your wheels, perhaps you knew before they did that homes are not recognized by strangers first. They are recognized by the people who stop flinching inside them. Years later, those who remembered the business in town would say the turning of it had happened in the annex with the judge and the letter and the shame-faced banker. They were wrong. It had happened earlier in a boarding house dining room when a mean little sentence was set down like law, and a tired man from the road answered it by asking when supper was. By then the answer had changed. One evening near the end of lambing season, Hester stood at the stove with her sleeves rolled and the window open to the west. May was shelling peas at the table, nearly grown. Ollie was on the porch, whittling a stick down to nothing with intense satisfaction. Tansy and Levi were coming up from the barn together, arguing in signs and laughter. Across the yard, Ward shut the gate, looked toward the lit kitchen window, and started for the house with that same long, exact stride. The stew had been simmering since noon. Biscuits rested under a cloth. Lamplight pooled gold across the table, and from the porch came the sound of boots on clean boards coming home.